Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, deceased livestock, malnourished children, drought-related deaths, and people searching for aid has sadly become the norm for more than 3 million people in Somalia, leading to a critical food shortage and loss of income-generated activities. Omar Mahmoud, the Somalia senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, will be joining me from Nairobi for his assessment on the scale of the crisis. And last month, the stock market price of Netflix dropped 22%, erasing $50 billion of its value after the streaming giant posted a weaker than expected subscriber growth forecast. Has the market reached its peak? I'll be putting that question and more to Samuel Scott, a marketing expert and columnist at The Drum. He'll be joining me from Tel Aviv. Then later, I'll be speaking with Manal Bandali, musculoskeletal director at the London Back Clinic, about the UK's evolving private sector healthcare industry. But first, as always, let's start the show with news from here in the UK, where the headlines are still squarely focused on the future of embattled Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is facing a significant leadership crisis. Following the release of Sue Gray's heavily redacted report into lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street, the Prime Minister must now await the outcome of the Metropolitan Police's separate investigation into 12 of the gatherings. Throughout the course of the week, a number of Tory MPs continue to hand in letters of no confidence to Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the 1922 committee.
Disappointed that he ain't doing anything, but about this Partygate thing, it's just petty. He should be getting on with bigger things.
It's a question of do what I say, not what I do. I think he should definitely resign.
He needs to fall on his sword, do the right thing, and let people get back to a little bit of normality.
Earlier, I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for some analysis. Simon, so the long-awaited report is out. The Prime Minister has refused to resign. Big question is, will his Tory MPs back him?
Yeah, I think inevitably we're going to reach the 54 mark, so there will be a vote. I think it's harder to work out what will happen in that vote because a lot of the intake of Conservatives who are there kind of feel like they owe their place in the House of Commons to Boris Johnson's popularity at the last election. They won a massive majority at the last election, so they'll be worried whether that would continue under another Prime Minister. But I think we will get to this 54 mark. Every day there seems to be more and more Conservative MPs saying they've put their letter into the Conservative Party House, and the latest is Tobias Ellwood, who's come out. He's a very respected Conservative MP. We've heard Theresa May, David Davis getting up in the House of Commons and saying that he should resign. We know he's not going to resign because that's just not his style. So it will be that the Conservative Party themselves have to have this vote, and then it's going to be hard to know whether, would they back, who would they go with then? Would it be Rishi Sunak? Would it be another person? And I think that's slightly more confusing. But I think it's inevitable that we'll have that vote sooner rather than later. I think a lot of the problems for the Prime Minister at the moment is that he can't really govern at the moment. He can't really make decisions. For example, he was supposed to have a phone call with Vladimir Putin. That's should be the main news event. It is across the world. The Ukraine situation, Moscow, are Russia going to invade Ukraine? He had a phone call scheduled with Vladimir Putin that he had to cancel because the Sue Gray report came out and he had to brief. So he can't actually govern, really. He can't really do his job because there's so much focus on this scandal. They are trying to move focus, media focus away. The Levelling Up plan came out today, was published, and he's very keen to talk about that. But people aren't really interested in that, especially as the drip of new revelations come out. Dominic Cummings is still blogging, and the media will. There's 300 photos have been sent to the Met Police. The Sue Gray report was published, but only, very redacted. So this Met Police operation will continue, and the new line now from Boris Johnson and Number 10 Downing Street is we need to wait for the, we need to wait for the Met Police investigation before we can answer any questions. Before that, it was like we need to wait for the Sue Gray investigation. So I think they're sort of kicking the can down the road, which isn't a bad idea because, a week is a long time in politics is the phrase. Who knows what could happen? Who knows what happens if Russia does invade Ukraine? Who knows, another news story will come along, and I think that's what they're hoping, is there'll be another big, dead cat on the table situation, and something will happen and it'll turn attention away. But it's not looking good for Boris Johnson. Somehow he's still in power, but I think, in a week's time we could be having a different conversation.
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't get any worse than this. Thank you, Simon. Now to our next topic. Somalia's escalating drought is creating a devastating displacement crisis. 245,000 people are thought to have already fled their homes, with numbers projected to reach up to 1.4 million as the situation worsens. At present, over 3 million people in Somalia, 1/5 of the population, are impacted by the climate crisis. Deceased livestock, malnourished children, drought-related deaths and people searching for aid has sadly become the norm for so many. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Omar Mahmood, the Somalia senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. He joins me from Nairobi. Omar Mahmood, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I appreciate you taking out your time. I read recently in The Scotsman, who described the crisis in Somalia as a dire humanitarian crisis. We typically hear those terms when British publications are speaking about Africa, but is this true? What is the most pressing concern on the ground?
Yeah, there's an ongoing drought in Somalia affecting large parts of the country, and this is cumulative. Essentially, the rains last year failed, and the expectation is actually the rains that are supposed to be coming this year, early this year, will also be below average. And so that's had, a dramatic effect in terms of harvesting, in terms of maintaining livestock. And so that ongoing drought situation is leading to concerns that it could even become more food insecurity and famine-like conditions.
Absolutely. You mentioned drought, but then we know that there's so much conflict in the region, not just within the borders, but also surrounding too. Now, the UN mandate for the African Union mission in the country, it's expired. I believe it expired at the end of last year. What's happening with that, and how was the mission going to be expanded again?
Yeah, so there's been a technical rollover of the mission's mandate for 3 months. And so that gets us through to the end of March. And right now, there's a lot of ongoing complicated discussions about the future of the mission, about having some sort of follow-up transition mission. Essentially, this involves the African Union, the Somali federal government, donors like the EU, and of course, the UN Security Council. So a lot of back and forth because there's a lot of different visions over what the future should be. But essentially, it looks like there will be a follow-on mission. But the details coming out thus far make it seem more a continuation of the previous mission rather than marking something dramatic. And so kind of begs the question of whether things will actually really change within a couple of years.
Absolutely, because, making sure you tick the box is really administration. What about the policies? Is the AU mission effective at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the big question. Essentially the mission is caught between this place where it maintains the status quo in terms of protecting urban areas from al-Shabaab and other actors, but at the same time isn't really advancing that much further. So the rural areas are still very much controlled by al-Shabaab, and government control hasn't really extended there. So that's the kind of the big debate here. Yes, you do need to maintain the status quo. So if you remove the mission, you would see an upsurge in al-Shabaab activity. But at the same time, how can you reform it so it continues to progress rather than stagnate or what we've seen over the past few years?
Absolutely. Recently, the British Minister for Africa, Vicky Ford, announced a £10 million package of support to help those who have been affected by extreme drought. I believe that's going to be shared amongst 3 regional countries. What more do the international community need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's welcome, but if you look at the funding appeals from some of the UN agencies, that's, falls very, very short of the mark, or they're very low on funding in terms of that. So that's one part of it, but I think the other aspect is really just early mobilization and organization around this. We've seen cyclical, famines emerging and droughts emerging in the Somali sphere. And so you had one in 2011, which was quite bad. And you had one around 2017, but there was a lot of early warning around that and a lot of early action. And so I think we're at that space. If you look at why 2017 wasn't as bad as 2011, part of it was the mobilization quite early. So funding's part of it, but I think also getting the word out, getting the focus on this and the mobilization right now will do wonders in order to prevent this from being as bad as it could.
Before I let you go, Amar, just to ask, to ask you personally, do you find that some places are harder to get the funding, that it's just not attractive enough to, members of the global community? They can only focus on Afghanistan at one point, and then perhaps they'll focus on Syria. That some of these issues in Africa, they've heard them all before, and they're not seeing changes, which is why it's so difficult to raise funds from the public.
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's part of it, especially there's a bit of fatigue when it comes to Somalia and these constant appeals. And, we've seen that again 3 times in the past decade. The other side of that is you have a political crisis in Somalia, a government that's really struggled to hold elections, which are already very limited in their outreach for over a year. And so I think there's a lot of mounting frustration when it comes to a place like Somalia and a lot of other competing concerns. If you look at the Horn of Africa, there's a lot more focus on Ethiopia and Sudan perhaps these days than there normally is on Somalia. So I think all of that does present a challenge as well.
Absolutely it does, but we hope that they get the support that they need. Omar Mahmoud, the Somalia senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you. Let's change gears now and focus on streaming. Last month, the stock market price of Netflix dropped 22%, erasing $50 billion of its value after posting a weaker than expected subscriber growth forecast. 2 years into the pandemic and more than a decade after the streaming service launched, a big question on investors' minds is there anyone left who might consider signing up? Let's ask Samuel Scott, marketing expert and columnist at The Drum. Samuel joins me from Tel Aviv. Samuel Scott, it's a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. So last week, Netflix Q4 numbers pretty much underwhelmed investors, to say the least. It wiped off over $50 billion of their market capitalization. Lots of analysts are now suggesting the market has been saturated, particularly for Netflix. You agree?
Well, market saturation is one part, but the real answer is that Netflix's competitors are now better at fulfilling the 2 reasons why people join streaming services: seeing new releases and having access to their favorite classic shows. NBC's Peacock has The Office. HBO Max has Friends. Over these tough few years, people have watched those comedies over and over again. And when it comes to new releases, people are not that sticky. Disney Plus lost half of the subscribers they had gained from people who just wanted to watch Hamilton or Wonder Woman 1984. For my part, I will start paying Prime Video again when the new season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel comes out this month. But after I finish it, I'll stop paying again. The switching cost of these streaming services is so low that it's very easy to both join and leave. If I were Netflix, I'd rebuild a library of all the classic comedies and dramas that people watch over and over again, instead of focusing on creating things that people will watch just once. That will keep subscribers.
Are these streaming platforms going to have to diversify to maintain relevance?
Well, basically, Amazon Prime likes to say that it is the future of sports. But is that true? Well, let's break down the numbers for Thursday Night Football in the US. Amazon can throw around a number like 2.9 million viewers without any context, and it looks good. But on the Fox TV network, the Thursday Night Football games have around 20.4 million viewers. When it comes to sports, the vast majority of people still watch the games on a standard TV in their living rooms or in pubs. Now, what about the future? Sure, more people might watch sports on streaming networks in 5 or 10 years. But if I am an advertiser, that means nothing to me because I need to reach people now. Yeah. So my media plan will be based on what people are doing today, not tomorrow.
Absolutely, really good insights with you, Samuel. We're going to have you back on again so you can tell us what other streaming sites we should be watching for our best comedy shows. Samuel Scott, marketing expert and columnist at The Drum. Thanks so much for joining me on Channels Business Global.
My pleasure.
Samuel.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be speaking with Minhal Bandali, a musculoskeletal director at the London Back Clinic, about the UK's evolving private sector healthcare industry. Plus, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest company news stories of the week. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking with Minhal Bandali. But before then, here's some company news for you. Popular online game Wordle has been sold for more than £1 million to the New York Times. The highly addictive game provides a daily puzzle comprising a 5-letter word, which players have 6 chances to guess. The game's founder, software engineer Josh Wardle, has said he decided to sell the virtual puzzle after it snowballed and became overwhelming to run. The New York Times has not guaranteed that people can keep playing Wordle for free after announcing the purchase on Monday. UBS has reported a decline in quarterly profit, but beat analysts' expectations. In the fourth quarter, net profit came in at $1.35 billion, down from $1.64 billion reported a year earlier. In the third quarter, the Swiss bank reported $2.8 billion of net profit. Ralph Hamers, the Dutch banker who took over UBS in November 2020, said the bank was in better shape than ever and announced a 50-cent a share dividend for 2021. UBS shares jumped more than 7% on Tuesday following the announcement. Sony's PlayStation is to buy Bungie, a leading American video games developer, for £3.6 billion amid a flurry of deal-makers across the sector. Bungie was owned by Microsoft between 2000 and 2007. Bosses explained the deal will give Sony Interactive Entertainment access to the developer's world-class approach to live game services and technology expertise. The firm has more than 900 employees and is renowned for creating unforgettable, evolving worlds centered around fostering meaningful player connections. The value of Meta Platforms, the owner of Facebook, sank by more than $200 billion on Thursday, the biggest fall ever recorded in the firm's 18-year history. The sell-off came after the company unveiled an unexpectedly steep decline in quarterly earnings and warned that users were spending less time in the most profitable corners of its social networks. The company forecast revenues of between $27 billion and $29 billion for the first quarter of this year, which was lower than analysts had expected. Although the company has been making investments in video services to compete with TikTok, owned by Chinese technology giant ByteDance, it makes less money from those offerings than its traditional Facebook and Instagram feeds. Now to our final topic. The UK's private healthcare sector is to help the NHS through the worst of the COVID-19 crisis, following a deal struck last month to extend capacity and help with treating certain illnesses. Under the 3-month agreement for an undisclosed sum, private healthcare providers will offer cancer surgery and cardiology treatment to ease waiting times. The UK's private healthcare sector currently boasts total annual turnover of over £70 billion and is dominated by 4 companies, namely Bupa, AXA PPP, Aviva and Prudential. For more on this, I was earlier joined by Minhal Bandali, a musculoskeletal director at the London Back Pain Clinic. Minhal Bandali, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio. Now, last month, the Health Secretary Sajid Javid set out plans to put private hospitals on standby to support the NHS services at risk of being overwhelmed by COVID-19. We saw Omicron infections reach record-breaking scales. But the big question is Britain's healthcare sector, the private healthcare sector, set up for this?
I think as we saw, the surge of Omicron cases didn't cause a lot of unwell patients. So private hospitals didn't actually have to step in. In the first wave, obviously we saw a lot of ITU beds being taken up, and therefore the private hospitals did actually step in and were actually managing to cope. So if this does repeat, if the cycle does repeat itself, I do think that private hospitals, in my opinion, will be able to be set up to be able to cope with this.
Okay, a recent survey, Manal, suggests that 1 in 3 people in Britain are no longer confident in the NHS. They're not sure that it can provide the care that their families need, which is probably the reasons why we're seeing surging numbers of people getting out private healthcare insurance. How do you think we got here?
I think that depends on who people have actually asked with it in terms of the stats. So if you ask someone who already has private medical insurance, they're obviously going to turn around and say, yeah, you know, we prefer using the private medical insurance over going back to the NHS, the public sector. But I think if you ask the Joe Bloggs on the street, I think they're quite happy with the NHS service. I, for one, am very happy with the NHS service. Obviously, the NHS service does its very best. I think the only downside why people might suggest that is because there's a wait time to see an actual practitioner, a medical practitioner, or a consultant, etc. I think basically, if you have private medical insurance, you want to cut out the timing to see a practitioner. And I think that's probably the downside of people maybe want to choose private health instead of the NHS.
Yeah, some people clearly can afford not to wait.
Yeah, I think if you have medical insurance, I think why not? There's nothing wrong with going to see someone a bit quicker and getting your road plan of your treatment on the way. I don't think it's anything to do with the service that the NHS provides. I think it's just the wait.
Absolutely. Are you finding that more and more of your patients are choosing to come and see you, choosing to pay, I'm sure pay a lot of money, rather than wait and go and see their GP? So they could have seen their GP or they could have got into the NHS, but they are specifically choosing to see you through choice.
I think you have to remember this as well, that because of the wait time, obviously we provide service like physiotherapy, podiatry, dietitian, CBT psychology as well. When you go to see a GP, there is a wait time. I think people they don't mind spending a bit of extra money now to get there to see someone a bit quicker. And obviously it does turn around and getting their treatment plan quickly underway. And they're getting expert opinion from a medical practitioner, so that they get to start their treatment a lot quicker. They also use it as a gateway to see a consultant as well, if needs be. And we have to also remember, in the last 2 years, people have saved a lot of money because they haven't really gone on holiday. So that means they have a lot more extra cash to be able to spend on go to see private medical insurance or go to see a private practitioner. So I think more people are happy to pay, even if it's just for an initial consultation, just to get their treatment underway so they can understand their pathology.
Absolutely. And you think that this has greatly improved since the pandemic?
I think people are obviously concerned to go to their GP because of COVID-19, and as long as the private practice are adhering to the government guidelines, I think they're happy to go see a private practitioner. Not to say there's anything wrong with the NHS service. I think they're just happy to go see someone a bit quicker because of the downtime in their GP practice. But obviously, number one, I would always suggest to go see the NHS first.
Gosh, coming from somebody who owns a private clinic, that's really positive news, and a thumbs up for the NHS. I'm sure Sajid Javid is watching. Medical tourism, that's a huge booming industry. Many of our viewers in Nigeria would have travelled to Britain or India or Dubai purely because they want to seek treatment. And it is increased recently, the bottom line of so many private practices. I saw some of your colleagues in the sector too. However, on the flip side, hundreds of thousands of Brits are also doing that. So they're willing to go abroad for private practice. But there's something about Brits paying to see a doctor or to see a consultant here in the UK that they just don't like. Is there some sort of taboo? Because of the NHS, they just are feeling uncomfortable about paying when they could wait 4 or 5 hours in A&E, but still get to see someone and not pay anything?
I don't think that's true. I think most UK Brits, I think they go abroad for cosmetic treatment, because cosmetics are a lot cheaper abroad. I think we have some of the best doctors, best medical practitioners in the UK. I think people are happy to see people in the UK. We've actually seen an increase in overseas patients actually coming to the UK for their medical treatment. So we have some of the best doctors in the UK, whether it's the NHS sector or the private sector. I think most people, UK Brits, I think they go abroad for maybe a cheaper option for cosmetic treatment, not for actual medical treatment.
Absolutely. Really interesting insights from you. Minhal Bandali, Musculoskeletal Director at the London Back Pain Clinic. Thank you so much for
Thank you
joining
very much for having me, Juliana, as well. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.